Hello and welcome to the first day of the National Building Code of Canada Part 3 webinar. This course is taught by Jensen Youth Consulting and will provide a wealth of information. I would now like to introduce you to our presenter Amal Tamim, Senior Consultant at Jensen Youth. Amal Tamim is a seasoned code consultant with over 25 years of national and international experience. She is a firm believer in knowledge transfer, specifically in the area of building safety and building code application. She has led multiple code seminars and training workshops around the world, including a 35 hours NBC 2015 training workshop. She is currently a senior consultant supporting the Building Code Consulting and Safety Engineering Services Canadian operations of Jensen Youth. And now I would like to welcome our presenter.
Okay, this is a copy, all the information is copyrighted, so we hope that you abide with the Canadian copyright laws related to reproduction, distribution, and display of the presentation and the quiz materials. If you need any permission, please address it to both Jensen Hughes and Reich. Okay, so the slides are only meant to be cue points, which are expounded upon verbally by me, and these are not meant to be comprehensive statements of the literal requirements of the codes and on specific projects. What you need to do, what you're going to be learning today is how to navigate the code, how to understand the provisions of the code, look for certain specifications that we're going to talk about today, as well as you have to go to when you're using the code for a specific project, please use the code, the standards. This is, and hopefully this presentation will be a good cue point for you in your practice, as well as for your exam. So a little bit about myself. I've worked internationally and I worked nationally in Canada. I'm really a big believer in transferring knowledge, and I've been giving presentations and seminar on all different topics related to areas of the building code. I've given a 35-hour course workshop in Quebec for the EXAC, actually also training workshop. And currently I'm working with Jensen Hughes, is a multinational fire safety code consulting and security company. I am based in Montreal, so I am bilingual. So if you have people who are bilingual, who are more strength in French, please do not hesitate to ask me questions in French, and I'll try to address it in English for everybody if you don't feel comfortable asking the question in English. So for today, this is the first session, Module 1. We're going to cover Module 1. We're going to go over some code fundamentals, define terms, construction classification, occupancy determination, vertical compartmentalization, and spatial separation and exposure protection. These sounds, for some of you, these sound all new terminology. For some of you, these are, you frequently work with those areas of the code, so it should not be anything new to you. We will go each one of them in the next presentations slides. Are you experiencing any bad audio? Some people are saying they are experiencing bad audio. I'm going to try to change to something else and let me know if it makes any difference for you. How about this? Is this better? Okay. All right, some much better. That's good. So when you're opening your building code, you gotta use your tables of contents. You'll see that I am putting pictures of the tables of contents and which gives you the information of where to look for people, can tab the tables of contents and can put tabs onto different sections and subsections of the codes that they use frequently. I recommend that you tab the table of contents for each section and each part of the code. So we're going to be working with volume 1 of the code. And if you can go to your table of content for volume 1 of the code. Can you see it? Can you guys go to it? So in volume 1, you've got division A, division B, and division C. There's 3 divisions in the code and 2 volumes. And volume 1, that's the code that we volume 1 of the code that we're going to be going through for part 3. We're going to have to look at division A, division B, and some of the division C. Okay, so as you see in the, I've put some arrows for you to indicate where the divisions are. And under each divisions, there will be parts. And division C is the administrative. Division A is compliance, objective, and functional statements. It's compliance part 1, compliance part 2, objectives and functional statements. Acceptable solutions are the prescriptive solutions of the code. So these are the code requirements. Always go and check your general part 1 of each division. These are critical, general compliance parts of the division. They have certain requirements that apply and some exemptions. These are very important part. Do not read just, you do not go, if you want to go to fire protection and then occupant safety and accessibility and you think everything related to fire safety is in there, that is incorrect. You really have to go to division A, compliance. You have to go to acceptable solutions, general, and part 3. As well, you can use some of the appendices. For us, for part 3, we're gonna be using Appendix D related to fire performance rating. If you're gonna use for the administrative provisions, these are really for the practicing architects, engineers, local officials. This is and gives guidelines and requirements and prescriptive requirements related to submissions and documentation and addresses the roles. So this is something that you need to be able to track directly from your table of contents. Anybody have any question on this? Sometimes I will say if people have question on this, if you don't have any questions, we're gonna go through it quickly, okay?
Hi, I'd like to ask a question. What does it mean reserved on the B?
Yeah, reserved is that it's basically it's a part or a division or a section that's going to be used in the future. So there is no requirement in it. There's nothing in it. It's just going to be reserved for future use.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, so we just went through volume 1. We looked at there's division A, compliance, objective, and functional statements related to the building codes requirements. Division B is acceptable solutions and appendices. With appendices, division 3C is the administration, and the volume 2 is the division B, which relates to part 9, which we're gonna go over in 2 weeks. Okay. So what are the objectives of the building code? So why are we, the architects and practicing engineers use the building codes? Because not only it's a regulation that they have to go and reference to do their designs. It actually, the codes address general requirements and provisions related to safety, to health, accessibility, environment protection, and resources. So you will see provisions that relate to some of these aspects. And for part 3, we're going to deal with safety, with accessibility, And some of the hazardous substances relates to health. These are some provisions in Part 3 that would address it. So these are the objectives that would be most relevant to us. We're going to go, when we go through the alternative solution, we're going to go through more details with the objectives and functional statements as we use them for basis for alternative solutions. We'll cover that tomorrow. So just for background on what are the essential objectives of the building code. The building code is applicable to new construction. We have the fire code, the National Fire Code of Canada, that is used for all buildings, for new construction and existing buildings. So once the building is constructed, that building is covered under the National Fire Code. So there are some provisions in the National Fire Code that apply to industrial buildings, to layout of office spaces, to storage. So if you're working with those types of building and also layouts for some assembly areas, there is requirements for fire safety plans. If you're working with the building code, keep in mind there is some provisions of the fire code that you need also to go and refer to. For us, we're only looking at the building code. We're looking at Division A for Division A in the Volume 1. Can you please go to that table of content? Can everybody find it? Is there anybody who does not find the table of content for Division A? Did everybody mute their mic? I think I may have the ability to mute everybody. Let's see. I think that may be Camille that had that. Camille, is she still on? Can you all mute your mics so that Can you guys mute? Everybody muted? Okay. Got it. Okay. So we're looking at the table of contents. Hopefully you guys are seeing it for Division A. And I would like you to go to compliance. So compliance 1.1 and general. So 1.11. So you've got the section and then the subsection and then the article 1111. This code applies to the design, construction, and occupancy of all new buildings and the alteration, reconstruction, demolition, removal, relocation, and occupancy of all existing buildings. Did anybody not find Article 1111? Everybody can find it? I don't, please bear with me, those who are very used to using the building code. We just going through basic steps here to make sure that people are able to follow when we go to the next slides. So everybody can find Article 1111. That's good. I'm gonna go next and to the next slides. In Division 1, Division A, we have applications of each division in this in Part 1. So Part 1 is essential to tell us about how we can comply with the code. Tell us about the expectation for materials, appliances, and systems and equipment. What kind of buildings and building systems are covered by the code. The applications of the code. It tells us about the application of each division. So when we're looking at the application of each divisions, we know whether to, it is, can you go to subsection 132? Can you all go to subsection 132? So the application of 132 is parts 1, 2, 3 of division A apply to all buildings in this code. So you gotta know, and then you go to 133. It tells us about the different parts that apply. The most important one is 1332, application of part 3, 4, 5, and 6. So part 3, 4, 5, and 6 apply to all buildings that are, including buildings that are classified as post-disasters, all group A building, assembly buildings, all group B care, treatment, and detention occupancies, care treatments, so basically long-term care and hospitals, group F division 1, high hazard occupancies, any building that exceeds 600 meters square in building area, or it exceeds 3 stories in building height, and it's used for major occupancies group C, group D, group E, group F, division 2 and 3, which are medium hazard and low hazard. So the application of the building code and how is essential to find which division applies to what type of building. You gotta make sure that you are familiar with division A part 1 compliance. And also in this part, we will find terms and abbreviations. There will be defined terms in the building codes. As you will see later, these are terms in italics. So if you go to section 1.4, that's terms and abbreviations, you will see a list of all the defined terms, and they are in italics, and they will remain in italics in the code. So you will pick up on a defined term as it is in the code. And we have, so there's this terminology, defined terms is there, as well it's followed by abbreviations on page 113. After that, in 1.5, you will see there is all the reference documents and organizations. Reference documents and organizations, I would like you to make sure to go to division B, acceptable solutions. Go to division B, acceptable solutions right away. And if you look at the table of contents, there's in part 1, there is general, and in general of part 1, there is subsection, there is section 1.1 general and section terms and abbreviation. Can everybody find the terms and abbreviation in part 1 of division B? Anybody cannot find it? You got to go to the table of contents of division B, go to part 1, and from part 1, the table of contents, you will be able to see the terms and abbreviations, and there will be a list of reference documents and organizations. So for division B, our list of documents and organizations is going to be in section 1.3. And if you go open section 1.3, you will see a list of all the different standards organizations with the document number, with the year of the edition of that document, the title, as well as you will see in the table the code reference where those standards are referenced. Does anybody and that's in table 1312. Is there anybody who does not find table 1312? I'm doing the exercise with you guys and I'm taking my time at the beginning. Let's make sure that we are all on track here. Okay, good.
Can I ask a quick question?
Go ahead.
Sorry. So when you were at 1332, application of parts 3, 4, and 5, it says building exceeding 600 square meters in building area. When you go to building area definition on the next page,
yes,
it means the greatest horizontal area of building above grade.
Yes.
So does that mean, so what if it's a 3-story building? Is this GFA building area or is this footprint building area?
It's the footprint is actual, and we'll go over that. There is we're going to be looking in over the definitions of building area in the next slides. So this is, you're already familiar. That's great, Dan. So you looked at the application.
Yeah.
You looked at the italics.
Yeah.
And you went to the definitions.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to apply it, and you came up with a question. This is the way to work with the codes. And one more thing to give you a little for each part, you're going to have at the end of the part some notes. So these are appendices, and this is for if you go to division A, part 1. If you go to the notes section, this is basically appendix notes, and they're going to give you explanations. So notes to part 1, compliance. Can you find it, everybody? Does anybody not find it? It should be at the end of the part 1. It's on page 115. Do you find the notes to part 1, compliance? So these are the notes. So in some of the provisions of the building code, you will see that the input between parentheses at the end of an article or an end of a sentence or a subsection. So you will, or a clause, you will see note A and the clause number or the sentence number or the subsection number. So in the notes, which will be at the end of each part, not necessarily every part has appendices, but for those appendices, parts that have them, you will see them right after the end of the part. So for part 3, if you go to part 3, go to page. At the end of part 3, first you will find the. I'm using my code and I'm looking at the page number here. It is page number 3207. Notes to part 3, fire protection, occupant safety, and accessibility. So these are all clarification notes that would be referenced in the code, and it gives you illustrations. It's a good, nice, handy thing to have. For part 1, so everybody saw that? Notes to part 3 on page 3207. Okay. All right. Before I move on to the next slide, as you see here on the slide, we talked about the application of Division B. We talked about the parts 3 applies to all post-disaster buildings. Post-disaster buildings are defined. It's a term in italics. You will find it. Group A, Group B, Group A assembly, and we'll go through the definitions. Group B, this is care, treatment, and detention. Group F1, high hazard occupancies. This is another defined terms. Each occupancy is a defined term. Any one of those buildings are going to be covered under part 3, 4, 5, and 6. And part 3 also applies to any building exceeding 600 meters squared if it's residential, or if it's exceeding 3 stories, irrespective of its area. So even if it has an area of 300 meters square, and if it's 4 stories, then part 3 applies to it. So if we have an occupancy that's group C, residential, D, office, personal use, professional uses, E, retail, medium hazard F2, low hazard F3. If those buildings are 3 stories or less and have an area not more than 600 meters squared, then Part 9 will apply to them. So in general, Part 9, it's small buildings and houses. We're going to cover that in 2 weeks. What we're going to cover today is Part 3 for the large buildings or critical buildings. So in the presentation, we're going to go for the next 2 days. We're going to look at construction types, classifications, occupancy determination, vertical compartmentalization, which is division into 5 compartments of building, floor assemblies and areas, spatial separation and exposure protection between buildings, and that depends on construction of the building and also the distances between the buildings. We're going to look also at the horizontal fire compartmentalization. We're looking at tenants, multiple tenant separations. We're looking at corridor separations. We'll look at special provision for high buildings, and high buildings is a defined term. Additional safety measures. Well, the definition of high building, you will see it under the 326. So we'll take a look at that. And they have specific provisions for high buildings. Special protection for certain areas of the building, for certain occupancies, for storage areas, hazardous areas. So there's certain sensitive areas, so there's certain occupancy requirements and certain hazardous areas and services protection requirement. A big question that's always coming to that architects deal with it, whether you work in industrial buildings or you are doing a project for fancy symphony hall or theater or educational building, and or an office building where a tenant wants to have multiple floors connected to each other. We deal with mezzanines, and we're going to go over the mezzanines and interconnected floor spaces. Let's see, and interconnected floor spaces, we're going to take a look at that. If you can look under definitions. Can you find me the definition of interconnected floor space? I am waiting for you guys to fill up the chat board. I want to see the chat board burning right now with definitions. Come on, guys. Interconnected floor space. Find me the definition of it. Remember, the definitions are all in Division A. It's an italic. It's thank you for that, for the help, Ramona. It's on page 18.
That's
Got
right.
it? Yeah. Can somebody write me the definition of interconnected floor space? Anybody?
Definition. To write or to read?
Yeah, let's see. The definition to either write or read. Somebody can write it and somebody can read it, please. Ramona, you found the page. Let somebody else tell me, read it for me, for us.
Actually, I found the page. This is B.
Hi, B. Perfect.
Interconnected floor space means a superimposed floor area or parts of the floor area in which floor assemblies that are required to be fire separations are penetrated by openings that are not provided with closures.
So great. Now, you guys, have everybody found it? Anybody is still looking for it? Okay, good. Everybody, Noel? Oh, okay, Noel looking on. So we are in Division A. Division A, it's at the beginning, remember? Division A, you look at the page number, Division A, in section 1.4, okay? Division A, part 1, section 1.4, and then we go in, there's terms and definitions. We're looking at page 1.8, which has a definition for interconnected floor space. Okay? Nawal, are you okay? Found it?
Can you tell it in French?
OK, à la page 1.8.
Mm-hmm.
OK, Terms and Abbreviations, section 1.42. Les termes et abréviations, section 1.4. Tu dois aller à 1.4, 1.2. Dans la division A. Ouais.
J'y suis.
So keep going to, it's in alphabetical order, the definitions. So you have to go to interconnected floor space on page 1-8.
Je suis dessus.
Okay, and it's by alphabetical order. It's the third term from the bottom of the page.
Okay. Quel est le nom en français en fait de...
You have the French book?
Oui, j'ai le code français.
Ce sont des espaces interconnectés.
Ok.
Okay, sorry about that, guys, but we have a French book user with us today, so we'll adjust.
Sorry, I apologize.
Okay,
C'est bon.
all right.
Yes, I found it. C'est bon.
Okay, good. We're gonna go also, so that's one good exercise. As you see in the definitions, there is definitions without definitions. There's italic terms. So as you go and look for a definition, sometimes you're not sure what it means. You have to still dig down to, for example, for interactive floor space, there's a definition of floor area, and there's fire separation, and then you go to find the definitions of these. So it's a little bit complex, but once you know how to use it, it becomes easy. In fire protection, we're going to go over fire protection, life safety systems, firefighting provisions. Fire protection systems are typically the active systems like the sprinklers and standpipe. Life safety systems are more the detection, alarm, communication systems. Firefighting provisions are related to fire department access, also water supplies. Egress and exiting, we're going to cover that, and we're going to look at the occupant load and exit capacity. We're looking at calculating plumbing fixtures, barrier-free designs, and finally, we're looking at existing buildings, alternative solutions related to that. So just as we we're going to start with code fundamentals. Remember on section 1.5, reference documents and organizations, there is one item I want to point your attention to. It's if you're looking at subsection 151, Article 1512, conflicting requirements. In case of conflict between the provisions of the code and those of a reference document, the provision of the code shall govern. So if there is, as you have seen, that there is lots of standards that are referenced in the code, and they give us the addition of those standards, and they tell us what they are referenced in the codes. However, if the standard have certain provisions that are in conflict with the code, which takes precedence? It's always the code that takes precedence. That's very important. If the code is silent on the addition, then you use the most recent edition. If the code states the edition of the standard, then you have to use the specific edition listed in the code. So that's part of the fundamentals. We keep going. We're going to start going a little bit faster now. We've taken that. Division A, we went through those, the reference organization, terms and abbreviations part. So Division B, as you can see, Division B, always read the general. Sub 1.1, part 1, section 1.1. As if you're just to familiarize you with the terminology of these, is how to read it. So we're going to look at, we have part 1s and part 3. In part 3, we'll look at, let me go back here. So this is part 1 general, section 1.1, subsection 1.11. And then we go to the next one. The part 3, section 3.5, subsection 3.52, article 3.521, sentence 3.5211, or 2 or 3 or 4, and then the clause, the A, B, C's, and the subclauses is the I, Roman I, minuscule I's, double I's, and 3 I's, and 5's, and so the Roman nomenclature. So be familiar with the terminology of how we subdivide the parts, the sections, subsections, articles, sentence, clause, and subclause. Okay? Another part of the fundamentals that people reading the building code and applying it and interpreting it, sometimes things are not black and white with the building code. Sometimes it's in grays. So, but most of the time it's the language of the code is as you read it, and you gotta watch out for some important words. And I've listed them: the ands, the ors, except as permitted, except as required, unless as otherwise specified, provided, notwithstanding. And I'm going to give you examples to see that we all are on understanding them. Compliance with this code shall be achieved. For example, let's take this one. Compliance with this code shall be achieved by complying with the applicable acceptable solution in division B, or using alternative solutions that will achieve at least the minimum level of performance required by division B in the areas defined by the objective and functional statements attributed to the applicable acceptable solutions. So what we get from this is that we have acceptable solutions, or the prescriptive solutions, in division B. So for us in division B, we're looking at part 3, and we're going to look at the part 3 as being the specifications and the requirements, the applicable solutions. This is the prescriptive code requirements. You see the term or. So or tells you you can use the acceptable solutions in division B, or otherwise you can use the alternative solutions that will achieve the minimum level of performance based on comparing the objectives and functional statements attributed to the prescriptive requirements to those of the alternative solution you're presenting. There is clarification notes on this. So you go to the end of the part and you look at the notes associated with this article. So article 1.211, and then sentence 1.2111, and then clause A. The next example, that's for ors. It's pretty simple. It's either A or B. The next one, application of part 3, 4, 5, and 6. And this is when we looked at that before. Part 3, 4, 5, and 6 of division B applied to all buildings described in article 1111 and classified as post-disaster buildings used for major occupancies A, B, F, F1, or exceeding 600 meters squared or exceeding 3 stories for the major occupancies C, D, E, or F2 and F3. So in this case, the and tells us all the buildings in Article 111. This is all the new construction, renovation, and reconstruction of buildings. And buildings that are classified as post-disasters, used for major occupancies, or buildings that are exceeding 600 meters squared or exceeding 3 stories. So this is you see the combination of and or. Except as permitted. So here we're looking at combustible material provisions in 3151 article. And you see there is a note associated with it. Except as permitted in sentences 2 to 4 and articles 3152 to 31524, 313.4, and 32216. A building or part of the building required to be of non-combustible construction shall be constructed with non-combustible materials. So what this tells us, that a building required to be, or a part of the building required to be of non-combustible construction, must be constructed of non-combustible materials. And you see the term non-combustible is a defined term. Why is it a defined term, non-combustible? Somebody? Why am I saying non-combustible is a defined term?
Well, it's a very important definition in the code, right? The definition, the difference between combustible and non-combustible.
It is, and it is. We know what it is. A definition. It's because it's in italics.
Right.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Great. So we know that buildings that are required to be of non-combustible constructions, they have to be non-combustible materials, except as permitted. There is exception to this, and we're gonna go through all these exceptions, and those exceptions are sentences 2 to 4 in this article, and Article 3152 to Article 31524, including Article 3113.4 and Article 322.16. All these are exceptions that permit other materials other than non-combustible materials. And also, so that's the except as permitted by. Notwithstanding, so let's look at another term, notwithstanding. Notwithstanding the definition of non-combustible materials. Okay, well, let's see, notwithstanding. So even though there is a definition of the non-combustible material stated in Article 1412, can somebody tell us about what's the definition of non-combustible materials? Who can find it quickly? What's the definition of non-combustible materials?
It means a material meets the acceptance criteria of CAN/GLC S114 test for determination of non-combustibility in building materials.
Okay, so where you looked at is for non-combustible material, that's on page 1-9. It's in the definition, right? Why is it in definition? Because it's in italics. It's a defined term. Non-combustible is a defined term. If you look at definitions non-combustible, as you just said, it's a material that meets the acceptance criteria of CAN ULC standard S114. Aha. So a non-combustible material has to pass the criteria of CAN ULC S114. What this sentence is telling us is that notwithstanding this definition, so a material is permitted to be used in non-combustible construction, provided that when tested to ULC S135, it meets the following criteria at a heat flux of 50 kilowatt per meter square. It's got a total heat release of not more than 3 megajoules per meter square. Its average total smoke extinction area is not more than 1 meter squared, and the test duration is extended beyond the time stipulated in the reference standard until it is clear that there's no further release of heat and smoke. So this, so all the definitions for us are in the division A as well, and you have to look in general and the general of each part when you're looking at the parts and the sections. So the sections, sometimes they will have some definitions, but all the definitions in italics are in division A. Okay, but sometimes the parts will have some definitions or terminology that they go in, but that's not italics. So in this case, notwithstanding the definition of the material, if we have a material that passes all these criteria, and on top of it, the test duration is extended beyond the standard, the S135 standard, there is no further release of smoke. So now you see that if you've got a manufacturer that tells you, oh, I passed the CAN ULC 135 and passed all their criteria, would you say this is enough, that he passed that? No, it's not enough, because you want to make sure that the heat flux is 50 kilowatt per meter squared that they used per S35, that you want to make sure that the total heat release is not more than 3 megajoule per meter squared. You want to make sure the smoke extinction area is not more than 1 meter squared, and you want to know that the test duration kept going until there's no further release of heat and smoke. So this is where the code goes beyond the standard and the code prevails. So we've seen this notwithstandings, and we know that there is lots of allowances of combustible materials in non-combustible buildings, as you see from this list here. Okay, unless otherwise specified herein, the documents referenced in the code shall include all amendments, revisions, reaffirmations, reapprovals, addenda, and supplements effective to 30 June 2017. So all the reference documents, even though they have specific additions, unless specified herein, the document referenced in the code include all the amendments up to June 30, 2017. We're looking here also combustible drain, waste, and vent, provided. So provided if, provided the piping, combustible drain, waste, and vent piping is permitted to penetrate a fire separation required to have a fire-resistant rating, or a membrane that forms part of an assembly required to have a fire-resistant rating, provided, sorry about that, provided if the piping is sealed at the penetration by a fire stop that has an F rating subjected to a fire test method and is exposed on let's see, with a pressure differential of 50 Pascal between the exposed and the unexposed sides, with a higher pressure on the exposed side, and the piping is not located in a vertical space. So if and statements, so provided. Combustible drain, waste, and vent piping is permitted on one side of a vertical fire separation, provided, if and only if it's not located in a vertical service space. So now this is a term, provided, that you're familiar with. Except as required by and as permitted by. So now we have a statement, a sentence that tells me the flame spread rating and smoke developed classification of a material, assembly, or structural member shall be determined on the basis of not less than 3 tests conducted in conformance of CAN ULC S102. We're not in a division. We're going over terminology, guys. All right? This is just examples of for using the terminology. Just take a look, just look at the presentation. Are you with me? Okay? Okay, good. All right. So now we're looking at the terms except as required by and except as permitted by. So if I look at the sentence 3.1.12.1, 1, I know that the flame spread rating and smoke developed classification of a material, assembly, or structural member shall be determined based on not less than 3 tests conducted in conformance of CAN ULC S102. However, except as required by sentence 2. So sentence 2 has more requirements than something that differs than sentence 1. Let's take a look. The flame spread rating and smoke developed classification of a material or assembly shall be determined on the basis of not less than 3 tests conducted in conformance of CAN ULC S102.2, which is the test for surface burning characteristics for flooring, floor covering, and miscellaneous materials. So for floor finishes, I use the CAN ULC S102.2 instead of CAN ULC S1.2 if the material is designed to be used in a horizontal position or relatively horizontal position with its top exposed to air. Or, you see the or? It cannot be tested in conformance with sentence 1 without a supporting material, or if it is a thermoplastic. A thermoplastic is a material that melts when exposed to heat, versus a material that solidifies when it's exposed to heat, or that chars. So a thermoplastic, it's a material when exposed to heat. So now you see except as required by, and except as permitted by sentence 3, a material, assembly, or structural member is permitted to be assigned a flame spread rating and smoke developed classification on the basis of Appendix D. We said that there is an appendix for part 3, and we're going to take a look at part 3, and we'll look at the appendix. But what this tells us that we don't need to test the surface burning characteristic of the material if we can find it in Appendix D. So, so this sentence allows us to use the appendix. It permits us to use the appendix in lieu of the testing of the product as required in S102. So now, as you see, except as required by or except as permitted by. Okay. Meanings of item within a code provisions. So words in italics are defined terms. Their meaning is under Volume 1, Division 1, subsection 1.141. Note references uses the same number reference preceded with the letter A. So we went over that. So if you see any note reference in parentheses, it's an appendix note that you go and find clarification on the code language. In the 2015 edition, the appendix section of each part is located at the end of that part. We went through some defined terms, some critical terms to know. It's the building height, the number of stories between the floor of the first story and the roof. That's the building height definition. Can you find it, the building height? It's hauteur du bâtiment for the French code. The building height in defined terms.
It's on page 14, Division A.
Perfect. Can you find that the definition for first story? The uppermost story having its floor level not more than 2 meters above grade. That's the first story.
First story, Division A, page 17.
Perfect. The uppermost story having its first floor level not more than 2 meters above the grade. So, so that's a very critical definition of locating the first story. If the floor level is more than 2 meters above grade, then it's not necessarily the first story. The grade, what is the definition of grade? It's the lowest of the average levels of finished ground adjoining each exterior wall of a building, except that localized depressions need not be considered in the determination of average levels of finished ground. So the average levels of finished ground along each exterior wall of the building. So you take the average on each exterior wall, you take the lowest of the average of each location, and you ignore localized depressions in the average levels. So, and that's what grade is. Be careful, the NBCC has a different definition than your provincial code in Ontario. And so make sure that you are very familiar with the definition of grade, first story for the NBCC. Building area, the greatest horizontal area of a building above grade within the outside surface of exterior walls or within the outside surface of exterior walls and center line of firewalls. So different buildings are divided by firewalls, so you can look at them individually. And then the building area of each, it can be measured from exterior wall to exterior wall, or if you have buildings separated by a firewall, from exterior wall to a firewall. And I'll show you a picture on the building area. A firewall is a type of fire separation of non-combustible construction that subdivides a building or separates adjoining buildings to resist the spread of fire, and it has a fire resistance rating as prescribed in the code. It has a structural stability to remain intact under fire conditions for the required fire rated time. The uppermost story having its floor level not more, sorry, this is, we'll need to correct that, ignore the last portion of this sentence. So floor area is the space on any story of a building between exterior walls and the required firewalls, including the space occupied by interior walls, partitions, but not including exit vertical service spaces and enclosing assemblies. So this is important when you're looking at floor area and you're looking at occupant loads, you're taking a look at the floor area. You look at the space occupied by the interior walls and partitions, but you don't look at the spaces in the like vertical service spaces, exits, and their assemblies. The suites, it's a single room or a series of rooms of complementary use operated under a single tenancy, includes dwelling units, individual guest rooms in hotels, motels, rooming houses, dormitories, as well as individual stores or individual complementary rooms for business and personal service and occupancy. So that's the definitions for suite and floor area. I'm going quickly through those. We'll get to use them. Be familiarized with them and know where to find them in the defined terms. Okay, building area. The greatest horizontal area of a building above grade within outside surface of exterior walls within the outside surface exterior walls and center line of firewalls. So if you're looking at this building, what is the building area? It's the maximum building area. So the greatest horizontal area. Is it 1,000, 1,500, or 800?
1,500.
Yeah, what is the ground floor? What is that one bay to the right? I mean, you can extend it one bay to the right, then what is your covered? So if you are looking at that, so what is your area? Let's say you extend it by 200. Yeah, you will increase it by the 200. And that's the building area. So if you say this is 1,500 and you add another area here, so you have to cover all this area. That's your building area. Okay? Everybody with us? Okay. So here, 800, 1,500, 1,000. Okay. Other defined terms, the fire compartment, an enclosed space in a building that's separated from all other parts of the building by fire separations, having a required fire resistance rating. A fire separation is a construction assembly that acts as a barrier against the spread of fire. See the note, so there's notes and clarification related to that. Khadija, you want to repeat which section?
The horizontal building area section, please.
Okay, so you see this. What is the building area when you look at this building?
Well, the maximum is the 1,500 meters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's the footprint of the building.
Okay.
From exterior wall to exterior wall. If you had a building here, if I put a building here, if I had a building here and I had a firewall here, it would be from exterior wall to firewall. Okay?
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Got it? Okay, thank you. So fire separation, fire resistance rating. The fire resistance rating is a critical element for types of construction. So each building is going to be built to a certain type of rating for its floors and structural members. The time in minutes or hours that a material assembly of materials will withstand the passage of flame and the transmission of heat when exposed to fire under specified conditions of test and performance criteria as determined by extension or temperature of information derived therefrom. So you can determine it from test criteria and performance criteria, or determined by extension or interpretation of information derived therefrom as prescribed by code. So the code tells us we can do it through testing or as specified by code, and it tells us to see Appendix D 1212 of Division B. So there's two ways of doing fire resistance, either through test evidence or looking into the Appendix D. We'll cover that later on. Fire protection rating, this is used for closures. And closures are devices or assemblies for closing and opening through a fire separation or exterior wall, such as door, shutter, damper, wire glass, glass blocks, and includes all components such as hardware, closing devices, frames, and anchors. It also applies to fire stop systems, which is consisting of a material component and means of support used to fill gaps between fire separations, and other assemblies, or used around items that wholly or partially penetrate a fire separation. So the closure is like a door or a window opening. A fire stop, if you're looking at it's a penetration or a joint. And they both are tested to tests that provide them a fire protection rating in minutes or hours that they pass, and they withstand the passage of flame when exposed to fire under specified conditions. Defined terms, post-disaster building, we talked about them before. That is a building that is essential to the provision of services in the event of the disaster, and they include hospitals, emergency treatment facilities and blood banks, telephone exchanges. This is critical because for structural performance and protection, we need to have special requirement for those types of buildings. Telephone exchanges, power generating stations, electrical substations, control centers for air, land, and marine transportation, public water treatment and storage facilities. So part 3 applies to those buildings. You gotta know that part 3 applies to those buildings, no matter how small they are. They never go under part 9. They're covered under part 3, and they have to meet their requirements. Okay. The last one is buildings of the following types are not exempted by this designation by the authority having jurisdiction: emergency response facilities, fire rescue and police stations, housing for vehicles, aircraft, and boats for such purposes, communication facilities, including radio and television stations. So if the authority jurisdiction makes a judgment on those, otherwise they are post-disaster buildings. Okay. Sprinkler assemblies are acting as a closure. So if you want to provide sprinklers as an alternative to doing a fire protection rating or providing fire resistance rating, then that's an alternative solution. In the Ontario Building Code, there is a provision that allows sprinklers to be used to protect openings and glazing instead of using fire resistance rated glazing or fire resistance rated walls. That is an alternative solution under the NBCC, and you can seek it as such, but it's not listed as a provision in the NBC. Okay, Matt? Okay. So we go to part 3. We say we're going to take a look at part 3 and Appendix D, fire performance ratings. In Appendix D, now we know where that comes from. It's from the definition. It allows to determine fire resistance rating from either the code, from testing, or by code. So part 3, take a look at part 3, the table of contents. 3.1, general. I've got a scope and definitions. You see here, there's certain definitions under this. And we're going to take a look at it. Classification of buildings or part of buildings by major occupancy. We're going to look at combustible construction and non-combustible construction. Construction type. So what is the construction type of buildings? The buildings can be constructed of different types of materials. And the most conservative type of material is, of course, the non-combustible material. What is considered non-combustible material? Concrete, steel. These are types of concrete block, masonry. These are the typical type of non-combustible materials. Combustible is typically the wood frame construction. Is that type of goes in that category. Combustible is a material fails to meet the acceptance criteria of CAN-ULC S114. So this is a definition. It's a defined term in the code. What's a combustible material? It's a material that is that does not meet the non-combustible criteria, which is what? It fails to meet the acceptance criteria of CAN-ULC S114. Combustible construction, that type of construction that does not meet the requirements for non-combustible construction. And we know that in part 3, there is specific requirements for non-combustible construction to use non-combustible materials unless permitted by the different elements in 3.1.5. In non-combustible, it's material. We saw that definition, any material that passes the acceptance criteria of CAN-ULC S114. Non-combustible construction is a type of construction in which a degree of fire safety is attained by the use of non-combustible materials for structural members and other building assemblies. I want to point you to the fact that in Appendix D, there is a table that does have typical non-combustible materials. And if we can look at it right away, Appendix D. Take a look at Appendix D. It's at the end of the Volume 1. After Division C, you see Appendix D, fire performance rating. And let's see here. Does it have it? Maybe they don't have it. Fire resistance rating signed. Taking a look at it, this is concrete column. At the end of this, assemblies, obsolete, non-combustibility section D-4. Can you see in page D-37? Actually, go directly to D-43. It's on page D38. Division B. It's right at the end of volume 1. So volume 1 ends with the index, and then you have division C. Right before division C, you've got the appendix T to part 3 to it's the appendix C for that part 3. It's D-38 before division C. Okay, so under D-43 on page D-38, typical examples of non-combustible materials. So now you have a list. What are non-combustible materials? They include brick, ceramic tile, concrete made from Portland cement with non-combustible aggregates. So you got to be careful with those new concretes and with the additives that they have in them. So if they have all these new additives and you don't know what they are and what's their performance, then it's you got to ask about it. So you've got asbestos cement, and hopefully no more asbestos is being used. Plaster made from gypsum with non-combustible aggregates. Typically, gypsum will have combustible aggregates or paper, but it's allowed under in 315. Metals commonly used in buildings: glass, granite, sandstone, slate, limestone, and marble. So for those typical materials, you can go to the appendix and you know that they're non-combustible. You don't need evidence on it. For any other materials, if anybody tells you that they are non-combustible, they're not in this list, you gotta have some evidence that demonstrates compliance to S114, unless there is exemption for using them in 315. And if you go to 315, let's go to 315. If I'm looking at part 3, table of contents, 315 is, it tells me, is subsection 315, non-combustible construction 3-7. So if you go to page 3-7, you will see a whole list of materials that are permitted in non-combustible construction. Most important, one of typical ones that you are going to be very familiar with pretty quickly is the minor combustible components. In 3152, Article 3152, Sentence 1, the following minor non-combustible components are permitted in a building required to be of non-combustible construction. So you paint, self-adhesive tapes, mastics, caulking materials, plastic air sealants, for use in exterior walls, fire stops or fire blocks as conforming to the sentences 3911 and 31117, article, tubings, electrical outlets and junction boxes, adhesive paper barrier, shielding papers. So get familiarized with the provisions and the articles related to combustible components and materials that are permitted in non-combustible construction. So classification of building and parts of building. Oh, okay. First of all, let's take a look at occupancy determination. So, you know, in occupancy, they can be a church, it can be a classroom, educational, it could be a warehouse, it could be a store, retail store, it could be a pool. So all the occupancies are defined and subdivided into different occupancies, major occupancies. We've got, and these are defined in this table, 3121. Article 3121 gives you all the different assemblies. For us, we know the assembly occupancy. A1 is occupancy intended for production of viewing of performing arts. A2, assembly occupancy not classified elsewhere. A3, assembly occupancies of the arena type. A4, assembly occupancy in which occupants are gathered in the open air. So that's for assembly occupancies. B1 is detention occupancies. B2 is your hospitals, your care and treatment occupancies. B3 is your care occupancies. C is residential occupancies. D is business and personal services occupancies. E is mercantile retail occupancies. F1 is high hazard industrial occupancies. F2 is medium hazard industrial occupancies. F3 is low hazard industrial occupancies. And why is it useful to take a look at the note A31211? So at the end of part 3, let's take a look at the note. So let's go to A31211. A31211. So that's on page 3-208. Perfect. You found it. So can you give me an example of, let's see, Group B, Division 3? Any example will work. Someone?
A group home?
A group home. Excellent. Group B, Division 2.
Care facilities with treatment.
Perfect. Group D.
Banks.
Who's that? Banks. Okay. Do you see in the Group D medical offices? Yeah? So when you have a medical office, it's not necessarily it's not necessarily a care and treatment. It's a clinic. You know, in clinic, you just go see your doctor. He gives you prescriptions. He, checks you up. And then sometimes there are those clinics where they're starting to do, like your dentist is a medical office. Now, if they start to do clinics where they do day surgeries, then it is your treatment occupancies. So you gotta be careful about your clinics and what they are doing in them. Let's take a look. Group F, Division 2 occupancy. Someone? Group F, Division 2, that's medium hazard.
Factories.
Factories. So there's different types of factories. It can be factories in Division 3, or it could be box factories. So how can we tell what's a factory if a group F3 or a group F2 factory? How can we tell? Remember, these are all defined terms. Let's take a look at the defined terms definitions of group F Division 3 and group F Division 2. And can somebody, when you take a look at the definition of low hazard industrial occupancy, which is group F Division 3, and medium hazard group F Division 2, please tell me a definition of one or the other. So maybe give me the definition of group F Division 3. Medium, low hazard industrial occupancy.
It's on page 19. Low hazard means industrial occupancy in which the combustible content is not more than 50 kilograms per square meter.
Yeah, so that's for the combustible content, or so it goes by combustible content of floor area. It either in kilograms per meter squared, 50, not more than 50, or in joules in energy output, 1200 megajoules per meter square of floor area. So what would be low hazard industrial occupancy? And when you're calculating your floor area, you need to take out all your vertical service spaces and stairs. So gotta make sure you watch out for those. So low hazard industrial occupancy is an F3. So you need to calculate the loads within the factory to know whether it falls under a group F3 or it falls under group F2. And of course, there is the group F1. How do you know if it's not an F1, which is a high hazard industrial occupancy. There is the definition and there is the list of different factories and plants and occupancies in the appendix, note A3121, that provides you that information.
Can you please talk about in group F2, sales rooms? How does that differentiate from retail?
Okay. Sorry about that. So that depends on where your which province. But if you're looking at the sales room within, if you look, let's take a look at the appendix notes. Let's go back to the definition of factories, group F, division 2. So you were looking at sales rooms within group F, division 3. These are, and you wanted to know sales rooms are a group F, division 3. And you've got a factory that has a sales room. So you want to consider it as subsidiary of the F2, or you want to do it as a separate occupancy. So depending on of how you want to do that. But if you have an F2, it's the most conservative approach, and could be that the sales room is a subsidiary to it, or you could consider it depending on how big the sales room is. You want to do an occupancy separation, and you have less requirement for your sales room than your group F2. So that's how you want to take a look at it.
Thank you.
Okay. And we look at the occupancy separation. So after 3121, let's take a look at why is important to, if we have multiple major occupancy. And the major occupancy is a defined terms. Now, Safira, we looked at the definition of low hazard and medium hazard. It depends on the amount of fuel load in kilogram per meter squared, or energy in megajoules per meter squared. And that is the definition of low hazard and medium hazard occupancy, industrial occupancy. Okay? And F2 could be an F10 or vice versa. It's really about the F1 is, you've got the list of F1 in the appendix. Yeah. And F2 could be an F1 because it meets one of it's one of the listed occupancies listed under F1. But there's also a definition for F1, and it is you gotta take a look at the definition of F1. If we look at F1, Noel, you take a look at the definition of F1, and then you know that what the hazards meet the definition of F1, and that's why you differentiate it. Now, in terms of major occupancies, we've got multiple definitions. Take a look at 3122, occupancies of same classifications. They are major occupancies, so even though they are similar classification group A, but if they are different divisions and they are not part of the major use of, they are separate major uses, you got to separate them. Take a look at definition of major use, major occupancy. The major occupancy, let's see. The principal occupancy for which a building or part thereof is used for. It includes an integral subsidiary occupancy. For example, we've got an office building with a parking garage. The parking garage is subsidiary occupancy to the group C major occupancy for residential, or group D for office buildings. Okay? Any question on this? For major occupancy, there is the definition for it. It's the principal occupancy for which a building or part thereof is used. It includes all integral subsidiary occupancies.
I have a question about major occupancy.
Yeah.
If I have a building that has A2 and C, but group C is the major occupancy, well, they're both kind of similar to each other.
What is the A2 used for? Is it used for the residents and by the residents, or is it's going to be a separate assembly use that is operated independently?
It will operate independently.
It's not used for the residents?
No. So in that case, which one would take precedent? Is it Group C or Group A2?
Okay, so you've got two major occupancies in your case.
Okay.
But if you have an assembly room, for example, you may have an assembly room like they serve food for the residents of the building. That's part of the Group C major occupancy. However, the floor area is used as a Group A2, but your major occupancy is Group C. You gotta watch out that you have a subsidiary occupancy for the principal use of the building. So if you got a residential building, you've got an assembly area where people, like a lounge, you know, that the people in the building can use. So that's in a Group A2 area. But however, that's a subsidiary group for that specific area of the floor. However, the major occupancy is Group C, and it remains Group C. Now, if you have a Group C building and it's got a major Group A2 area that is connected with it, and it's part of it. However, it's separate the entrances from the residents, and it can be used by people from the exterior to host events and all that. Then that is a separate A2 major occupancy from the Group C occupancy. Like the parking garage. I've got a parking garage that is used solely by the building occupants of the residents. So that parking garage is subsidiary. So my major occupancy is Group C. If I start decide, well, no, my garage is going to have special entrances for people from the outside, and it's going to be operated by somebody from the outside, and I'm going to have them pay people from the outside paid for the using of the garage. That's two major occupancies because it's different operation, different uses. So it's no longer a major Group C, it's a major Group C and a major Group F3 building. Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Everybody else on the same? So here I have a clear delineation between different uses. I have a Group D office build. I've got a building with Group D offices. I have retail, Group E, and I have Group A2 restaurants. These are three separate distinctive occupancies. So I've got my restaurant, I've got my Group G, and I've got my Group E. Okay, police stations. Let's look at the police station. If I had a police station, typically I can, what would be the police station classification? It depends. Does the police station have a detention area or not? If the police station has a detention area, well, you know what? The code addresses this. Take a look at Article 3124. Police station. A police station with detention quarters is permitted to be classified as Group B, Division 2 major occupancy, provided the station is not more than 1 story in building height and 600 meters square in building area. Otherwise, it has to be classified as Building 1. So if it does not meet those criteria, if it's more than 1 story and it's more than 600 meters squared and got detention quarters, it defaults to detention occupancies, which is B1. If I have a police station with no detention area and it's just my typical professional service building, it's a Group G occupancy. Okay. So if I've got multiple major occupancies, we go to the table 3131. Take a look at it. 3131. And we need to separate our occupancies by depending on their major uses. So now we talked about we talked about the fire separation of multiple major occupancies in a building. So I've got between the A2 and a Group E, I need a separation between those two. And A2 and E, my separation requires, what's the rating required?
2 hours.
2 hours, perfect. So 2 hours major occupancy separation. Vertical compartmentalization, floor assemblies and shafts. We, basically we need to classify the building based on its major use, its building area and height, and then we can start looking at the type of construction and vertical compartmentalization. So let's take a look at it. How do we look at the construction type of the building? I think we can take a break. What is it now, 1:49? How are you guys doing? Do you want to take a break now and we can do 15 more minutes, or we come back at 2 o'clock and take up from 2 o'clock? We continue, everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can continue.
Oh, perfect. All right. So we've got 4 factors that affect the degree to which a building is vertically compartmentalized, or for which we can define. The building height, whether the building is provided with sprinklers or not, the firefighting provisions is like access for fire department, the major occupancy of the building, and the building area. So we know what the building height, we know that the building area, we know what the major occupancy or occupancies in the building, and then we need to know whether it has sprinklers or not, or maybe it is required to be sprinklered. And if it's got a firefighting provision, is that, does the fire department have access? So how many, and in the code addresses firefighting provision in terms like how many streets it faces, and that's only relevant for non-sprinklered buildings. For sprinklered buildings, we only take a look at the building height, area, and the major occupancies. Article 322 will tell you the following general construction requirements, and the articles in subsection 322 will tell you the following general construction requirements: combustible, non-combustible construction, sprinklered or non-sprinklered, what are the floor fire resistance ratings, the mezzanine fire resistance ratings, and the roof fire rating, as well as bearing walls and columns fire resisting rating. And certain combustible types of construction, they give you provisions for types of materials to use for the exits shafts. So watch out for those types of construction for combustible construction. The number of streets that the building faces is critical for non-sprinkler buildings classifications. This is the building faces a public street within 15 meters and to the public street. So take a look at number of streets facing the building under 32210. If you take a look at 32210 quickly. Are you there, everyone? 32210. Street. Every building shall face a street located in conformance with the requirement of Articles 3.254 and 3255 for access routes. An access route conforming to subsection 325 is permitted to be considered as a street. For specific type of buildings, 32550 or 3258, as the building is considered to face one street where not less than 25% of the building perimeter is within 15 meters of a street or streets. A building is considered to be facing 2 streets, provided not less than 50% of the building perimeter is located within 15 meters of the street or streets. So 50% of the building is within 15 meters of a street or streets, then it's considered to be facing 2 streets. It's facing 3 streets, it's not less than 75% of the building is facing a street within 15 meters. So this is in 32210. And I used the guide, the NBCC guide, the 1995 user guide to part 3. This is a nice guide to use, and the reference. It's got lots of illustrations and clarifications. Of course, some of the code provisions may have changed, but the basic concepts of the codes remain the same. The streets, basically, and facing a street has not changed for a long time. So if we look at the building classifications, the articles under 322 subsection gives us ratings of compartments. So it gives us floor ratings. And based on the floor ratings, we know what the rating of exit stairs and service shaft and floor shaft. So let's take a look at the one example of single major occupancy. I have a major occupancy group C, that's a residential building with an area of 2,000 square meters. Its building height is 5 stories, and the building owner wants to put sprinklers in it. What kind of occupancy classification do we it has to meet? So can I make it combustible construction, non-combustible construction? What is the fire resistance rating of the floors and load-bearing elements? Let's take a look. So major occupancy group C. So under the articles under 322, we need to take a look at it. And they start alphabetically. So they start with group A, and then they go to group B, and then after group B, they go under group C. So do you agree with this? The single major occupancy of group C, I have a building of 2,000 square meter. And the building is sprinklered. And it is 5 stories.
Question. What's the difference between this one and 3.2.2.50, which is up to 6 stories sprinkled?
Okay, the 3.2250, if it is sprinklered throughout, is not more than 6 stories. It's got a limit on height. And it has a building area of not more than 1,800 meters squared if it's 5 stories. Your building area here is 2,000 meters squared. Can you use the 32250?
No, because it doesn't meet the area requirements.
Exactly. So you gotta look at the end, right? The end in clause C, right? If you have an and, you gotta look at the building area as well. Okay, you guys agreement with that?
Can you just talk about the difference? So yes, we're not allowed to use it, but there's a difference in why we're not allowed to use it for this purpose. Is it different fire ratings or?
Oh no, basically, yeah. I mean, what this allows it to have, like you cannot use it because it doesn't meet the area. And what this allows is that it doesn't talk. What's the type of construction? It's permitted the 32250 for if we limit the area to 1,800 meters squared, for example, right? I can use it if it's 1,800 meters squared, and it can be of combustible and non-combustible construction. But my building is 2,000 meters squared, so I have to use 32248. And what 32248 tells me that the building is non-combustible construction. So I have to build it of non-combustible construction, which is a safer type of construction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so why I'm not using also 3.2.2.47?
47.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any height, any.
Yeah. If you want to do that, you can do that if you want a more conservative type of approach. However, let's take a look. It's non-combustible construction. Okay, it's non-combustible construction. The building sprinklers throughout. I have sprinklers throughout the same. Except as permitted, the floor assemblies shall be fire separations, fire resistance rating not less than 2 hours. So in 32257, I have a floor rating of 2 hours. But I want to make sure that my building owner is telling me, I want to meet code, but I don't want it to be too expensive. So if I go with 32248, the floor assemblies are 1 hour.
Okay.
You see that?
Yes. So the pattern is like there's
it's the more conservative, more expensive to less, you know, and then more flexible, less expensive.
I see. I see
You
it
see
on
that?
other occupancies too, correct?
Yes, that's the way it is set up for every occupancy.
Okay, thank you.
Any question on this? Are you okay? Okay, so we can go on. So, and then now I have to look single major occupancy. I have, okay, a group E, retail, mercantile, 1,500 meters squared. So this is a store. I have a building height of 3 stories. The building is sprinklered and it faces one street. So the building faces one street. It's got 1,500 meters squared. It is sprinklered. It's 3 stories in building height. So what would be the type of construction?
3.2.2.65.
For E. So you said 65. So you're going with 365. The building group E is permitted to be, okay, the building is sprinkled throughout, it's not more than 4 stories, and it's got a building area not more than 1,800. So that's good. Okay, so that's one approach. That's great. Another approach.
67? Yeah.
Or 66.
Or 66 or 67. We can even go to 67. Why? I've got 3 stories. I cannot go to 68. Let's start. So I start from the bottom up. 68, 2 stories. No, I go up. 67. And that's my approach. I don't know. You will find your own approach, but my approach is like I go, okay, 2 stories, 2 stories. No, I've got 3 stories. Okay, I keep on going up, you know, in my from the bottom up, because I always want to start with the most flexible one. So if I'm starting with this one, I'm going 32267. Why? The building area is not more than 2,400. Well, it's not more than 2,400. That's good. The building is permitted to be of combustible, non-combustible construction, and it's got floor assemblies of 45 minutes. Yes, so fire resistance rating. So I've got, so that's giving me my buildings. Of course, I can use the more expensive, but when you're designing for your clients, if the client wants more expensive, you can go to more conservative type of construction because he wants to have more redundancy in his design and more safety. If he's concerned by minimum, if he wants to design to the minimum code requirements, so the minimum code requirements is the provisions of 32267 apply. Are we clear on that? And as an architect, you need to meet always the minimum requirements. And for the floor assemblies, we've got 45 minutes. Load bearing assembly columns, columns, arches, walls, it's 45 minutes, as well as they need to be, oh, that's a good or an and. If you look at here, supporting, basic, where is that? Supporting structure. Load-bearing walls, columns, arches supporting an assembly required to have a fire resistant rating shall have a fire resistance rating of not less than 45 minutes or shall be of non-combustible construction. So the building code in this case is telling you, you can use non-combustible construction, but it has to have a fire resistance rating. If you use non-combustible construction, you don't need a fire resistance rating. So take a look at your ORs. This one, the OR gives you flexibility, more flexibility. Okay?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so what's the difference between fire separation and with a fire resistance rating and a fire separation without fire resistance rating in practice or practically? What's the difference between the two?
Okay, a fire separation with fire resistance rating. Okay, so a fire fire separation is a tight continuous construction that you have to have protected closures in it. Sometimes it may have, so if you have an opening, you need to protect it unless it's a permitted opening by some other provisions in the code. Once a fire separation has a fire resistance rating, it has to be tested and it has to meet the testing criteria for fire resistance, and you allocate to it a certain fire resistance rating, whether 1 hour, 45 minutes, 2 hours, or 1.5 hour. And that's, we go to a maximum 2 hours in the building code. So so that's the kind of provision. We'll get into fire separation later on, but in general, this is the concept for fire separation. Yeah, it's continuous tight construction. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other question on this? So what if you have multiple major occupancies and part of your building is used for a group E? For example, I have a retail on the ground floor. I have an office on the second floor. I have residential on top, and then I have group B on the fourth, and a group A assembly. I mean, this is extreme, crazy situation, but you can have buildings with multiple major occupancies. And how do you handle it? And this is basically the code, Article 3225, 3228 gives you how to handle the guidelines and the requirements for how to handle superimposed occupancies. So superimposed major occupancies, you can decide to use the most conservative construction and apply it to all of them. That's one approach. You can decide that you go, okay, well, I'm going to decide to construct the group E based on group E because that's my ground floor and it's all group E. But if you decide to use the group E classification, you have to keep in mind that you have to use the whole height of the building. So you look at the group E classification based on how many stories in building height, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you have to take group E classification for a 5-story group E, and that's your ground floor needs to meet that. And then you have the major occupancy separations between group E and group D requirements. And then the floor rating needs to be either the greatest of the requirements of the major occupancy separation that we saw in part 1 of division B of as well. No, actually in 311. Yeah, in table 311, we have major occupancy requirements. And then we have the classification of the building and the floor ratings. Again, if I want to base it on group D building, I'll take a classification for group D building, and the rating of the floor here will be based on the group D building classification. However, I have to make sure that I have the fire separation requirement between the major occupancy also. So you see, this is a complicated text, but let's do this. You take each occupancy by itself, and you consider that it encompasses the entire building, the whole building area, as well you take the building area and then the whole building height. Group E, multi-cultural retail, 2,000 square meter, 5 stories. And that gives me, for that floor, 32264. Apply the floor assembly rating to the floor above the group E, a major occupancy. So this is to our fire resistance rating. And then treat the group D as if it encompasses the entire building. So it's 2,000 meters squared, 5 stories. That 32257 is 1 hour fire rating. That apply that floor rating to above the group D. And similarly for group C, I find the occupancy, which is in this case 32248. Apply the floor rating. There is no floor rating above. There's no floor rating above. This is all group C. Okay. So this is what I have. But one thing to keep in mind is that your occupancy separations will always need to be maintained. So if you have the building here and you've got group 1 that is allowed, and you've got a group B here, what is the separation between a group C and a group B and a group B and a group A? So if I apply the multiple superimposed occupancies, I know what rating I use. However, I always need to be cognizant of the fact that I have major occupancies here, and I need to separate them in accordance with 311. So the requirement for separating between, let's say, a group A2 from a group B2 or B3, let's see, A2 to group B2 and B3 is 2 hours. And between group C and group B2, that even though I'm allowed 1 hour for the type of construction, but between group C and B2 and B3, I'm required to use B2 for 2 hours for B2 and 1 hour for B3. So always be cognizant that when you have multiple major occupancies, you can classify your building on the worst case and most conservative one, or you can take it one by one and apply it based on the height of the whole building. In any case, you still have to address the major occupancy separation and take the most conservative rating between all of them. Okay, so sprinklers, sprinklering in lieu of fire rating. Some of the articles tells you that, okay, you have to rate the roof, especially in non-rated construction, and you have to rate the roof. This is in non-sprinklered construction, and but if you provide sprinklers, then you can avoid having a rating for your roof, and this is one of the provisions in 32217. You can also apply it through alternative solutions if you don't meet if it's not listed in the article. Roof cannot be considered an occupied floor area like roof terraces. However, there is provisions related to roof terraces, and we can take a look at it. If you you will be, because the roof the floor area is is measured from exterior wall to exterior wall. In our case, even though it's not it's an exterior floor area, if you have a terrace and you've got seating on it, and people can go up to the pool and have assemblies in it and events, then you do need to be cognizant of the fact that you need some kind of separation of it from the other spaces below, especially if you have different tenants below it. So here, rating each major occupancies. And then the shaft ratings depends on the construction classification. So we determined our floor ratings in 322. And you gotta be careful in here, because our exit shafts rating, elevator shafts and service shafts are gonna penetrate our floors. And because they penetrate our floors, we need to maintain the integrity of the floor separation by providing the appropriate rating. Exit shafts and elevator shafts are easy. They're gonna take the rating of the floor. So if you have a 2-hour floor, you have a 2-hour exit shaft. Yeah, it's same thing with elevator shafts. Service shafts is a little bit different. So to double check it, let's take a look at 3441. Are you there in 3441? So every exit shall be separated from the remainder of the building. I'm reading 344411. Every exit shall be separated from the remainder of the building by fire separation having a fire resistance rating not less than that required by subsection 322, but not less than 45 minutes for the floor assembly above the story or the floor assembly below the story if there's no floor assembly above. Okay, so we know that the fire resistance rating of the fire separation reefer need not be more than 2 hours. Every exit shall be separated from the remainder of the building by a fire separation having a fire resistance rating not less than that required by subsection 322. So 322 dictates the floor ratings, and 322 dictate the rating for your exit shafts. Similarly, for elevated, sometimes you don't have a requirement for fire resistance rating, and you have to default to 45-minute rating. So always your exit shaft will have a rating, even though sometimes your classification in 322 does not require it. Then you apply the 45 minutes if there's no requirements for floor rating. For elevator shafts, let's go to 3531. 3531. You see the table 3531. It tells us that for 2 hours floors, I have for elevator hallways, I have 2 hours rating. For 1.5 hour rated floor assembly, I have 1.5 hour enclosure for my elevator. For 1 hour is 1 hour elevator enclosure. So similar to the similar to that of exits. Elevator shafts will take the rating of the floor assembly. If there's no rating, it defaults to 45 minutes. The surface shaft is the exception. You can go to 3631. Table 3631, fire separation of vertical surface spaces. If I have two hour fire rating for my floors in per 322 articles, then I only need 1 hour fire separation for my service shaft. If I have 1.5 hour for floor assembly rating, I need 1 hour again service shaft rating. If I have 1 hour floor assembly or 45-minute floor assembly, I need 45-minute shaft. If I don't have any rating for my floor, I don't need any rating for my service shaft. So that's in table 3631. So in this one, we go through this in terms of the rating. We have the fire rating of the floor assemblies. And we have the floor ratings here. So I've got 2 hours floor here. So I know my exits is 2 hours. Here, 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour, 45 minutes. Oh, 1 hour, sorry about that. So this is all 1 hour and this is 2 hours. Here, same thing. For my service shaft, for my elevator, similar to my exit. For my service shaft is 1.5, 45, 45, 45, 45. Okay? And now this one is, we've got 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Here I've got 2 hours for my exits, 2 hours for my elevators, and for my service shaft is 1 hour. Okay? If an upper floor is required to be sprinklered, this would result in each one of the floors below it to be sprinklered. So we don't have, in terms of sprinkler, the code does not allow you to protect one floor on the top and all the floors below is to remain unsprinkled. So once you protect the top floor or one of the floor above it, everything below it needs to be sprinklered. And this is the sentence that it applies to 322.18 too. Okay, this is one example. I think it's good time to stop here and we will pick up in the afternoon. We'll finish through this quickly and we'll start module 2. Do you have any questions on what we have done? There is you've got the quiz for module 1. You can do it. It is posted on the LMS. Please go to the LMS and do the quiz. We'll go through the answers and we'll finish up this and we'll start more. We'll get to module 2 right after that. Is that work for you guys?
Yes.
Sorry, are we going to have a break or are we just going to do the quiz and then continue?
Sorry about that. No, we're going to have the break now, right? Because we only have, you can do the quiz in the break or anytime. If you want to do it, if you want to do it at the end of module 2, you can do it. But I think we're going to do it would be nice if you can do the quiz. But if you want to do it tomorrow morning to go over it, it's better for you. We can do it tomorrow morning.
Okay, and how long is our break? I mean, maybe people can take a break and.
Yeah, so we're going back at 3 o'clock.
Okay.
We don't have too much time for the break, so maybe take the break. We'll review both quizzes in the morning tomorrow. How about that?
Okay.
Does that works better? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that's better.
Okay, good. All right.
Got a few questions.
Okay. If you want, yeah.
Can we do it now? The questions.
Are you guys okay with that? That I'm going to be hanging around taking questions, but if you want to listen to the questions, we can put them on the chat, and I'll put the responses on the chat. It's better so that everybody will. How about that? What do you guys think? I'm gonna try to take a break too. I need to drink some water, but I will take your question, Mark, and then we'll take a break after that. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so my question is, say for example, in a building, it's a condominium, and there are different suites of Group C residential. So where do I get the fire separation
We'll do
required?
that. That's the horizontal compartmentalization. Next module.
I see. Is it the same for example, I have an F2 building and it's subdivided into different suites. It's under horizontal compartmentalization too, correct?
F2, it's depend. Yeah, it's yeah, and you gotta be careful for each suites of F2. We'll take a look at it.
Okay. Another question is for a subsidiary occupancy. For example, I have mess hall in a residential building or condo.
Yeah, it's subsidiary.
Do they have a separation required too, or is it not required?
No, it's not required, but you gotta take a look at the corridor serving, assembly areas. But it's not separate major occupancy. No.
Okay. So that means that if I have a kitchen on the ground floor and the rest will be upper floors will be residential, so there's no separation as long as it's subsidiary.
As long as the residential occupancy. Yeah. But then there's specific provisions that you need to look at the floor area and separations of corridor service, service areas and service spaces. So there is provisions related to that, but they are not major occupancies separations. Yeah.
One last question. If I go back to the definitions, the floor area, I understood the building area.
Yeah.
The floor area, is it the total floor areas of each story minus the those what you had mentioned?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
But
Okay.
go back to the
Got
definition.
it.
Always go back to the definition. It's in there.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So we'll take a break now and then we'll continue. Okay. So we were just recapping in terms of the question came up in terms of, you know, what's the difference between table 311, 3131 in terms of multiple major occupancy separations, which can be applied to horizontal separation of multiple occupancies as well as vertical separation of multiple occupancies. The articles in 3.22 can be developed based on for buildings with multiple major occupancies in a different approach. Two different approaches. And if you go to Article 3227, we'll take a look at what happens when we have multiple superimposed major occupancies. So if we know if we have different super occupancies on the same floors, we need to look at the separation between them based on multiple major occupancies. And we also need to make sure that we find the most conservative 3.22 article that applies for the most conservative construction requirements for either one of the occupancies and apply the most stricter one. But what if we decide to put them on separate floors? What happens then? So this is what we did before. So we looked at we have that, yeah. And this is what we have. We have separate occupancies on that are superimposed on top of each other. So Article 3227 is the one that gives us that. A building, if one major occupancy is located, I'm looking at sentence 2. If one major occupancy is located above another major occupancy, the fire resistance rating of the floor assembly between the major occupancies shall be determined on the basis of the requirement of the subsection for the lower major occupancy. And right before it, it tells me that in a building in which one major occupancy is located entirely above another major occupancy, the requirements in the subsection for each portion in the building containing a major occupancy shall apply to that portion as if the entire building was of that major occupancy. So what that tells me is that I can take a group, I know that the group E is on the ground floor, but sentence 1 of 3227 tells me that in order to address the type of construction and the requirements for floor and combustibility and sprinklering, I need to take a look at this building as if it is 5-story tall. And I'll take the building area and that building height and assume it is group E and all group E and find the 322 article that's applicable to it. And I do the same exercise for the group D occupancies and the same exercise for the group C occupancies. And then the fire separation that applies between those different floors, it's basically on a major, it depends on the fire rating of the classification for the occupancy below it. If it happens that some occupancies do not require sprinklers, but the ones on top require sprinklers, then the whole buildings require sprinklers. So this is one approach that people may choose to do in case they want to have more flexible and less restrictive construction on the top floors. There is another approach for parking garages to be considered like a separate building in 3212. That's another area that you might look into for buildings where you have a very large garage in terms of area, but you're stacking different buildings on top of it. So you want to make sure that you can use Article 3212 for that. That allows you to consider the garage as one building and separate it from the separate buildings on top of the podium of the garage. So that's 3212. But for the typical occupancy, you need to take a look at 3227 if you want to take advantage of some of the flexibilities that is allowed for the upper floors that would have occupancies that are more less restrictive, that have requirements that are less restrictive than the ones on the lower parts. Otherwise, if you don't use this approach, you have to use the stricter requirements for the most hazardous occupancy or the most sensitive occupancy and apply it to the whole building. Does it clarify it for you, Azadeh?
Sorry, yes, but I have like related to that. So on this 3131, the the separation between group E and group D is nothing. But on this exercise that we did, we separated the floors from group E to group D to 2 hours fire rated.
Yeah, because of 3227.
Yeah, that's my question. Just like how we can define where to use which one of the 3227 or the 3131.
There is no choice. There you have to apply them together. Yeah, there's no choice. They go together.
Oh, okay.
They go together. The code goes together. You can't just say I choose this part of the code and ignore the other part, right?
Right.
So if one of them said 1 hour, the other said 2 hours, you have to apply the most conservative one.
Okay, I understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Everybody is on board with that? Okay. So you guys can take time to do this exercise. It's an example and you can work it through. Just for the sake of time, we can work. If you have any questions on it, I'll take the questions at the start of our module tomorrow when we're doing the quiz reviews. The NBCC, now we're going to go into spatial separation and exposure protection. We're going to finish it. And after we finish this section, we're going to log off and go back, log on to the module 2. So we're going to try to finish this. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. So, the building code also in terms of fire protection looks at fire spread, not just from within the building and protection of the building itself and its occupant. It's also looking at, societal responsibility and potential for spreading fire from one building to the other. And the spread of fire from one building to the other is going to be based on the amount of openings in the walls, the type of construction of the exterior walls and the cladding of the exterior walls, and the spacing between the buildings. All that, the closer the building, the more likely the fire is going to jump, the flames is going to affect the exterior wall. If you have combustible cladding, it's going to catch fire quicker. If you have larger openings, you have more contribution of oxygen to your fire, and you've got a more fire intensity, and that and then you're going to expose the building adjacent to you. So all that is developed into tables into the building code that looks at the type of occupancy, to looks whether the building is sprinklered or not. It looks at the dimension of the openings. It looks at the spacing between in the dimensional openings is for sprinklered buildings. It looks at the ratio between the width and the height of the opening. In sprinklered buildings, we don't worry about we just look at the area of the opening, and in terms of limiting distance, the distance between them, we look at the distance between the property, at the limiting distance between the two buildings, and that's something that is defined in the building code. So two definitions to look at first. Okay, limiting distance is the distance from an exposing building face to a property line, the center line of the street, lane, or public thoroughfare, or an imaginary line between two buildings or fire compartments on the same property, measured at right angles to line of exposing building face. So if you take a look at this, so we're going to look at the property line. So the limiting distance is the distance to the property line, to the street, middle of the street. And these are two ways of looking at it. So let's take a look at this closely. A street is any highway, road, boulevard, square, or other improved thoroughfare that is 9 meters or more in width. So if you look at driveway, there's of 6 meters or less, that would not count as a street facing the building. That has been dedicated or deeded for public use and is accessible for fire department vehicles and equipment. Now you can have a private road that is 9 meters, and it is accessible by the fire department, and it can take the loads of the fire department vehicles and equipment, and the fire department says it is usable, then it is considered similar to a public street. So it is dedicated for use and accessible for the fire department. The width of the street is important in this case. So the limiting distance is the distance from an exposing building face to a property line, the center line of a street, land, or public thoroughfare, Or if we have on the same property and we have multiple buildings above in the same property, we can do a limiting distance to an imaginary line that we set it between the two, and we measure the exposing building face at right angle to it. And that's what these are the different options for setting the limiting distance and to where we measure them. Is that clear? Any questions? So now we are in 323, spatial separation and exposure protection. And if you know that limiting distance is a defined term, exposing face is a defined term, and unprotected opening is another defined term. Okay, no questions. Unprotected opening, what is that? It's a doorway, a window, or opening other than one equipped with a closure, having the required fire protection rating, or any part of the wall forming part of the exposing building face that has a fire resistance rating less than that required for the exposing building face. So if I have any opening in the wall, a window, a non-fire protected rated door, if I have a wall that have a rating, but it's less than the rating required based on the limiting distance and for that type of building, then I have an unprotected opening. And we have defined the exposing building face. It's that part of the exterior wall of a building that faces one direction, is located between the ground level and the ceiling of the top story, where a building is divided into fire compartment to the ceiling of the fire compartment, the exterior wall of a fire compartment that face one direction. So when you're looking at the exposing building face, you can do it for each fire compartment separately versus then doing it for the whole exterior face of the whole building. So of course, every floor, if the floors are fire separation, every floor, the face of every floor, the exterior wall of every floor is considered exposing building face, and you look at the area of that floor for it. So again, I'll go back to the NBCC 1995 user guide. It's got nice illustration on where we measure the exposing building face. So we've got openings here, openings here. This is the plane of the projection of the openings. So, and I measure my limiting distance from the exterior wall. If I have no separation between the fire compartments here, I have to measure then my limiting distance to here from this distance to the property line. If this compartment is separated from, if this compartment is separated from this area here, and this wall is all closed, then I can measure the limiting distance specifically for this compartment based on this limiting distance, which gives me a higher limiting distance and more flexibility in the construction of my exterior wall. So depending on whether your compartment, your building is, your floor area is separated in different compartments, you can, and where the location are of the openings are, you can determine whether to which face you're gonna be measuring your limiting distance. So unprotected opening, we said it's a doorway, window, or opening other than the one equipped with a closure, having the required fire protective rating or any part of the wall that has a fire resistance rating less than that required for the exposing building face. So they do not have the required fire protection rating, or it is part of the wall that has less fire resistance rating. The maximum permitted unprotected openings can be determined on the basis of the following: the occupancy classification, the exposing building face of the fire compartment, exterior walls, the limiting distance to a property line, the presence or absence of sprinklers that will define it. So now the tables that relate to this for determining with the construction of the exterior wall an amount of unprotected opening in the exterior wall. First of all, we need to determine what's the percentage of the building area that can be unprotected openings. If you are a designer and you would like to start off from this is the design I want, then you check how much unprotected opening you have against what the building code tells you can have. You can take a look at whether if you change the limiting distance, if you can subdivide the interior of the building into fire compartments. You can look at those different factors in order to allow you more flexibility and more openings and more unprotected openings in the exterior wall. And you may even look, instead of keeping the building unsprinklered, you could put sprinklers in it. It allows you more flexibility in the construction of the exterior wall and number of openings in it. But if you don't have sprinklers, you need to go to table 3231B. Can you go to the table, please? Okay, you take a look at the table 3231B. So the ratio LH, it's really the dimensions of the opening of the exterior wall exposing face, and whether the ratio is L over H or H over L is between 3 to 1 to 10.1 over 10 to 1. So that ratio for buildings is relevant only for buildings without sprinklers, and based on your maximum exposing building face or compartment exposing building face, fire compartment exporting face, and the fire compartment is defined as a fire compartment separated by a minimum of 45 minutes. So you may have a fire compartment with non-rated fire separations around it. Then you don't take it separate. You don't take it separately. You have to take the whole floor, and you take the exterior wall of that whole floor. But if you've got fire compartments of minimum fire resistance rating, then you can take the exposing building face of that compartment. And based on the area of that exposing building face of the exterior wall, the L over H or H over L ratio, you know it because it's the dimension of your exterior wall. Then you take a look at, you have already determined where is your limiting distance. And based on your limiting distance, you know that the percentage of unprotected openings you can have. So you can have, the table shows it to you. I'm not sure if we showed the table here. This is more about, okay, here's the table. This one's table 3.1. Okay, this one we showed the table 32131D. The 3231B is for unsprinkled building. 3231C is for unsprinkled building, but for group E, retail, and group F1 and F2. These are considered, these are buildings, retail and industrial buildings of medium and high hazard occupancies. Do you expect more fuel loading in them? So therefore the fire intensity is higher, and therefore the provisions related to unprotected openings are stricter for them. So they have a separate table, that's 3231C. For all other occupancies that are not sprinklered, that's 3231B. If the building is sprinklered, then you can go directly to 3231C and 3231E. 3231C again is sprinklered occupancies other than group E and F3, F2, and F1. And in those buildings, we only look at the area of the exposing building face. We look at the limiting distance, and based on the limiting distance and the area, we can tell the maximum area of unprotected openings. And that is a cumulative area of unprotected openings. So you may have small openings and large openings. The cumulative area on the exposing building face is that would be the maximum. Based on the maximum unprotected openings, you can go to table 3237. And based on table 3237, you can tell what is this maximum permitted area of unprotected openings. Then for each of the type of occupancies we looked at, we can determine what is the rating of the exterior wall, the type of construction required, and the type of cladding required. And I'm going to walk you through an example now. But that's in general the approach for determining the construction of the exterior wall. And when we talk about exposure protection based on exposing building faces and fire separations. The fire separations is that the distance between the buildings dictates the limiting distance, and the limiting distance is determined based on the distance of the exterior wall, the furthest exterior wall closest to the property line, that to the property line distance, or the distance from each fire compartment exposing building face to the property line. If you are dealing with a street, then you can measure it to the middle of the street. If you're dealing with buildings on the same property, you measure the limiting distance to the measuring line between the buildings. And the setting of that imaginary line, you can discuss. Typically it's midway between the buildings, but if you want to adjust, you want to have a separate, different approach, you really have to talk to your local jurisdiction to address how you want to do it. So any questions?
Actually, I have a question about exposed face. I'm just wondering, how do you really measure that if you have separate fire compartments within the building? So do you measure the wall thickness of that fire separation? Do you measure from the center line to the other center line of the other column or other wall, or do you take the measurements from inside face of each column or wall in order to get the area of exposed face?
Okay, so when you're looking at the no, it's not the inside area, from the center line to center line.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
It's about the exterior wall. It's not the interior portion of the wall. Yeah.
I have a question about the ratio of the unprotected openings.
Yeah.
If there's a mix of ratios in that face, do you just take the most conservative approach if there's a mix?
Yeah, I mean, if it's the same, it's one exterior wall, right?
Yes.
So then you need to decide, do I have different fire compartments? And then you have multiple exposing faces, and that compartment will have, you project it to the line that has the most, to one line. You have to, this is the way we do it.
Yes, but if that
right?
one fire compartment and that one building face has openings that are, say, the ratios are less than 3 to 1 and then also over 10 to 1?
But it's not the ratio to the openings, it's for the exterior wall itself.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Any other question?
Can I ask, can you move the property line if it's within the same, let's say, same lot, the same property?
Yeah, but you have to do that. You have to get the authority having jurisdiction to agree on it.
Okay, because I'm thinking maybe you can decide that one building won't have any openings, but then you would allow for the other building to have more openings if you move the property line.
Yeah, but that needs to go into the property deed and all this other documentation and then local authority needs to agree to it. Yeah.
Okay.
But because you don't want somebody else to go in and do the same thing where the property line is now set to it's the normal line. So it has to go into the building documentation with the registry.
I had a question in the comments about exposed faces that aren't parallel to property lines or center lines of streets.
Yeah. So basically you project them. It's similar approach to this. I think I have. So you project them. It's all about projection. So that you might, I don't have it the drawing here. So if you're building, so let's say you've got the wall is diagonal, then your opening is facing this way, right? And you have to project it to this side and not this side. If I have diagonal here and I've got some on this diagonal, I have to project them to this side. You see what I mean?
Yeah, so it's two planes of projection instead of one.
Exactly.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, so let's try to do this. So I've got the floors are 45-minute rated floors, so I can do each floor as a separate fire compartment. And in this case, I have an F2 medium hazard occupancy. I've got 90 square meter exposing building face. I've got 4.5 meter limiting distance. In this case, I'm measuring it to the property line, and the building is sprinklered. So based on that, what is the maximum unprotected opening I can have? Can somebody tell me? You can do that based on tables. You have to tell me which table you're using, 3231 B, C, D, or E?
It would be E, correct?
For an F2, it would be E, correct? Okay, so based on E, what would be the maximum unprotected area of openings?
18%.
So, so for 4.5 meter,
I use the 4 and 100 square meters.
Exactly. So you have to go, because it's between 80 and 100, you have to go to the 100. So you go more conservative, right? So you've got 100 square meter, and then for 4.5 between 18 and 26, you told me it's 18. Now, it's depending on which jurisdiction you do in the NBCC, you can do the interpolation and of the numbers based on between 4 and 5, you've got the half the difference. So you can actually increase the area, and that's allowed best practice. But if you're taking a look at the table by itself, then you take the most conservative approach. However, the best, I'm letting you know, there would be a best practice of taking the average of the difference.
Can you take the average of both items, the area and the distance?
That there is an interpretation out there. Some people don't do it, and some people do it. And I wish I can give you the proper the one answer on this. But if you go horizontally, do it. It's okay to do it. But going this way, no, go to the higher.
So on the exact exams, what should we do? Should
Take
we
the conservative? If they're not gonna do that to you. They're gonna go more, very close to the ones that you have in the table.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know in Quebec they do it both ways, but in Ontario they do it one way. And I'm not. Who's practicing in BC? Can you tell us about the BC? How you? I forgot how you do it in BC. I think you do it similar to the NBC, right?
In BC, we can take the average of both categories. Yeah.
Yeah. So the NBCC approach allows you to do that. Quebec does it. Ontario doesn't do it. So. Okay, so that's the exposing building phase. We've done that. Interpolation, that's another example. And then we know the construction of the exterior walls depends on the unprotected openings. And when you look at the table, there is a different requirement for combustible and non-combustible. The construction of exposing bases, faces, you really have to look at the provisions related to that in 3236, 3237, and keep going. There is lots of provisions related to exterior elements in exterior walls, and there's allowances for unlimited unprotected openings for certain cases. That's in 32310. For low fire load, one-story building, there is allowances. So these are all exemptions to what the table requires. So 3237 tells you something, but then you've got other provisions that make it more restrictive for some occupancies or make it more restrictive for occupancies with minimal fuel loading. So the table is your guide, but don't forget there is other provisions in there, notwithstanding as permitted, except for, so you got to look out for all the different provisions and you know how to find those. If for example, we have the protection of exterior exit facility. If an exterior door within one fire compartment is within 3 meters horizontally of an opening in another fire compartment, and these walls meet at an angle of 135 or less, the opening of the exterior wall is required to be protected. So we don't want to expose the people coming out from an exit to a fire from a different compartment, so especially if they are within 3 meters from your horizontally from the exit discharge. So that's one of the requirements. Any question on this one? Opening protections. Where openings are required to be protected, it must consist of glass block, wired glass, fire shutter, other fire protection rated closures. It could be fire resistance rated glazing, or you just, a sprinkler protected glazed wall assembly may be used, but it's based on alternative solution. Okay? So we covered code fundamentals. We went through using the code. We looked at terminology, defined terms, construction classification, occupancy determination, vertical compartmentalizations for floors and shafts. And we looked at spatial separation and exposure protection. You have a quiz on this. Take a look at it. There is some exercises you can do from this presentation that we didn't go through. Take a look at them and apply them. So we're going to go to module 2. Please log off and go back and log on to the second module from the RAIC. Before we log off, Rajnish, you have a question and your hand is raised.
Sorry, that was from earlier today. I forgot to remove it. Yeah, I asked the question. Thank you.
You did? Oh, okay, yeah. For sure. Okay, so please log off and log back on to module 2, and I will see you in just a few seconds, okay?
I have a question before we...
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Could you please explain the grade again, how it works on the slope?
Okay. Okay, so the grade, it's the grade is basically you take the average of the building of the difference of grade at each building face at the exterior wall, and you take the average grade level at each side of the building, and then you take the most conservative one as your grade level.
Like, for example, I'm looking at the illustration on the note, which is A 1.4.1.2.1. That shows a picture where we have like a slope line and a stepped building. So there in the picture, they are indicating grade for each stepped portion. So my question is, like, for a specific building, is the grade is going to be a constant number, or it will have different grade for each separate section?
Oh no, this is an allowance. Actually, it's good to do that. You can look. I mean, you have to go look at the provisions of the that relate to this illustration. Okay. So for one building, you typically have one grade. So once you set your grade, that's you. Well, you have different grades. Physically, you have different grade levels. But for calculating a height of the building, you have to use one grade, and that's the most conservative one. Okay. Okay, but when you have like step buildings, the code gives you an allowance for calculating grade for the step buildings, and that is in 1334. So you have to go to the provision of 1334 and take a look at it and see what it is about. Okay, so in that space, the step buildings are divided by firewalls. So each building you have to determine it as a building. So when portions of but then sentence 2 tells you, except as permitted in sentence 3, where portions of buildings are completely separated by a fire separation that has a fire resistance rating not less than 1 hour, and extends through all stories and service spaces of the separated portion, each separated portion is permitted to be considered a separate building only for the purposes of determining building height.
Okay.
Not area, building height. So you take the whole area, but for each portion of the building can be constructed differently based on building height if it meets those requirements. Each separated portion is not more than 4 stories in building height, and is used only for assembly, residential, and business and personal occupancies. And the unobstructed path of travel for a firefighter from the nearest street to one entrance of each portion, separated portion, is not more than 45 meters. So you gotta make sure you read the provision when you're looking at the illustration and the clarification in the back.
Okay.
So that's associated with 1. Okay.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right. So we're gonna log off now, unless somebody else has a question. We're okay? Okay.